Welcome to the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, John Martin Keith. Celebrities, working class musicians, and people who work behind the scenes in all areas of the music industry will share their stories, encourage you, and give practical advice of ways you can make a living doing what you love in the music industry. This episode is brought to you by Edenbrook Productions. Edenbrook Productions is the company I founded to help musicians grow in their craft. Are you a songwriter, but maybe you've been told your songs aren't quite there yet? Or are your songs ready, but you don't feel stage ready? Or maybe music is your passion, but you feel imprisoned by your day job and you don't know what to do next to make your dream a reality. Well, Edenbrook Productions is here to help. We offer consulting services via phone call, Skype, and FaceTime. And for the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast listeners, we're offering an introductory 1-hour consultation special. Click on the link in the show notes to contact me, and let's get you making a living in the music industry. Hey everyone, welcome back to Season 3 of You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry. I am so excited to be back, and I'm so excited that you are here and that you are coming along this journey with me and all these guests that are sharing their stories and sharing amazing advice for you guys who are wanting or are actively trying to be in the music industry. Thank you for being a part of this, and I'm excited for what you're going to hear this season. Today, I'm talking with my friend Tony Wood. He is one of the most successful songwriters in music, period. He currently has 34 number one songs across multiple genres and over 900 songs recorded by various artists like Michael W. Smith, Zach Williams, Reba McEntire, For King and Country, the Oak Ridge Boys, Ricky Skaggs, Scott Krippayne, Bill Gaither, and so many more. We are discussing how to know if you are ready to approach a publisher about a songwriting deal, writing with other people who are better than you, and the importance of the radio single versus full albums in today's market. Please enjoy this conversation with Tony Wood. All right, guys. Hey, I'm hanging out with my friend Tony Wood in his office. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Marty. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited for this because as a songwriter, I love connecting with other songwriters who have been more successful, have had a lot more experience down the road. Because it's always an important thing for anyone, no matter what they're doing, to connect with people that are doing what they do, you know, that have lived that life longer and have had success, and you can learn and grow from them, you know. So it's a huge honor for me to hang out with you and talk with you. So thank you.
Look forward to it.
So I'm just looking around your office here, and I see lots and lots of plaques and artists hanging up on your wall, and gold albums and probably platinum albums. I don't know. Dove Awards. I see all kinds of stuff. And I love it. And I want to get into that kind of stuff. But let's just back up briefly and tell us who you are, where you're from, and what got you into this crazy business we call the music industry to begin with.
Well, all right. I was born and raised in a small town in Virginia, Chase City, kind of a tobacco farming town. One stoplight. Grew up there all my whole life. Church was a large part of the social life of that. There was not a lot else going on. A large recreational lake that we hung out at for fun. But other than that, church was kind of the center of most of the social life. Two things that kind of, I think, influenced the music somewhat for me was the music I was hearing at church, just the hymns, things the choir was singing. I love that. And then just top 40 music coming out of Raleigh, North Carolina, WRAL 101.5 in the late 70s. Yeah. Just, if I was in my room or driving or anywhere, music was on always. Probably... probably about the 8th or 9th grade, it really kind of caught my attention, like what more than it seemed to be grabbing my friends. Started being interested in maybe playing the piano. Took a couple of years of lessons during high school. not good. Didn't really try to be good. Just tried to be good enough to play pop songs that were on the radio at that point. Run to go to the store, and buy the sheet music, and come back and get the people at church to show me how to play it. And so what's an A major 7 chord? What's a B minor 7? Get them to show me how to do that. And it became fun, just kind of hanging out with friends around the piano, singing pop songs. Wrote a couple of crappy love songs, just the reason any guy sits down at a piano, picks up a guitar. Wrote those, foolish enough to actually play them for girls that I was interested in high school. Don't have a lot of regrets. Maybe kind of wish I could take that back a little bit. Think occasionally, would they still have cassette copies of those anywhere hiding? Right. Oh, say they don't. Wrote a handful of bad love songs. Then it's like, okay, what else do I want to write? Wrote about the things that were going on in me spiritually, things that God was teaching me. Wrapped that up in about 6 songs. And then it's like, okay, what else?
Now what? Yeah.
And then started just looking around at my friends' lives and started writing about them and conversations we'd have with them, which, that's the dangerous part with being around creative people and writers, is that we really do steal and borrow from everybody else. But you do that real respectfully. I would never take something personally somebody said and put it out in public in a way that was embarrassing or uncomfortable for them. Yeah. You learn how to hide it enough that they don't even recognize that the song's about them. But deep down inside, that at least that's where the idea started from.
You got the Tony Wood approach, or you got the Taylor Swift approach
of just put it all out there,
right?
And we can pretty well guess who it's about.
Yeah. So this is the Tony Wood approach.
Okay,
I understand.
I would think we're about 180 degrees apart on that. That's true. Great observation there. I never found I made any of my friends uncomfortable, because I'd always say, hey, that thing we talked about the other day, I wrote this, and I'd play it for them. And they'd be, oh, that's great. Okay. Real grateful for a church that gave an opportunity to play some of my songs in church in high school and then into college. My home church, First Baptist Church in Chase City, kind of as a part of really the evening service. Baptist churches have special music,
right?
And I never wanted to sing my songs. I always, even then, I would get one of my friends, one of my buddies from youth choir. I'd teach it to them at my house, and then let them stand up in church and sing that. Loved that. I mean, I'd play for them, and that really was fulfilling to me at an early age. I didn't have to get up and be in public and have people looking at me, but still, I loved creating this thing, putting it together, and somebody else communicating it.
Yeah,
that really. You don't realize at the time how foundational something like that is for where you're going to end up.
Sure.
Because I didn't know any songwriters. I didn't know anybody else that had really ever written a song. I just was this thing that nobody ever told me I couldn't do it. And I just started, and nobody said stop, and nobody got hurt. So I just kind of seemed to keep going down that path through high school and into college, really doing it with this acceleration of more and more. I took a church position as choir director, worship leader in college. Started writing some songs for them to do also. Wrote a Christmas musical at one time and taught it to everybody in the choir. And we just did that, and nobody said stop. So I kept on. Really, getting to the end of college, this writing thing is not going away. It's just clearly a part of who I am, what I'm wanting to do, not knowing what to do with that. Where do I go? Where is this going to lead?
Right.
During that time, I had started, there was a thing called, I think it was CCM Update, was like this monthly newsletter, and they had a page in the back of some different companies that were for, it was in Songwriter magazine. It wasn't CCM Update, it was Songwriter magazine, where they would but some companies that would, for that month, as a part of the feature, accept a song. If you send it in, they'd give a critique, send it back, maybe possibly publish it. And I was always doing that. And, lo and behold, I got return letters and people writing back about it. Never complimentary about the music. Nobody ever affirmed that in me. Actually, kind of said the music melodies were very plain, very ordinary. And they weren't much better on the lyric, but if there was a little bit of affirmation on anything, it was on the lyric. And it was when I got back the second one on that, I knew something within me said this is right and this is true. And I kind of looked at like, okay, what am I passionate about? I am passionate about communicating the idea. I really am. I love the words. I love shaping that. I can functionally write music, and you hope for music to be good or interesting. You'd like it to be a little bit more than functional.
Right.
So I kind of let that speak into me at that point, and I didn't articulate it well at that time, but I remember thinking, I bet there's somebody else in America who gets kind of the opposite letter this week, that your music was a little better than your words. And I'm looking on credits on records and going, gosh, most songs are co-written, at least two people, sometimes three, sometimes more. I wasn't finding anybody much to co-write with, just...
You're still in Virginia at this point?
At that point, and in college, just not finding other music majors and stuff like that, but nobody that really wanted to just write songs. So I thought, well, maybe there are other people out there that are passionate about the music side of it, and maybe I can meet them. When I moved here, a writer said once that you're always searching for your people. And now I look back and go, that's exactly what I was doing. I was trying to find the people that were as passionate about this thing like nobody was in that time.
Mm-hmm. So what made you decide to make the transition from Virginia to Nashville? Was that after college that you packed up and decided to come out here? I'm just going to take the chance and see what happens, or
it was after grad school. I went to seminary for 3 years because the writing thing was completely unrealistic. What do you?
Just sort of a side thing at this point.
Yeah, I didn't know what to do with it, but I knew it wasn't going away.
Okay.
That was, it just was. I was spending an inordinate amount of time doing this thing that had no end game in sight. I also love student ministry too, so that's what I went to get my master's in. I love teaching the Bible to teenagers, just leading those kinds of ministries. Mm-hmm. So that's what I kind of prepared for as I was wrapping up. Seminary, married at that time, and again, the writing thing just wasn't going away. I had this fear of, I was early 20s at that point, of hitting 50 and having taken a church job somewhere in America, and I had a box of unfinished songs and a box under my bed, and I thought, if I hit 50 and I don't know, I could almost get claustrophobic laying in bed at night thinking about that. Like I could physically feel it closing in on me. I could handle it if I was told you're just not good enough. If I knew how good is good and could get a real assessment of how I stacked up against how good is good, and found out, okay, I'm not that good. Mm-hmm. I could live with it, but I think I always felt like the shame is in not trying. The shame is not in failing.
Sure.
Good Lord, this for any creative, failing is a daily thing. For everything that you reach, though, for this really nice thing that happens, there are 14 things behind that just did not quite work out the way you want to, but you learn to live with that. That's just part of the path, part of that journey. But I knew that I had to at least try. And my wife was willing to, Nashville was this spoken once or twice and then not spoken for a long stretch about. So when we graduate, what if we look at getting a church position out in Nashville and just coming here and learn the lay of the land? And that's what we did. We knew nobody in town, Marty. We didn't know anybody. So some friends drove us out in a moving van, watched that head back east, shut the door, and thought, man, it'd be great if we had somebody to go get coffee with. But it was nothing. It'd be nice if we had jobs. We didn't have jobs either. So I was starting to try to find a church position at that time. So we just both did temp work for the first stretch getting here. Crappy jobs, second shift, pushing paper on a printing press, trying to take advantage of the town if there were ways to. It was the first time, really, because of this area, so many artists were headquartered here. They may be in concert at a church here or a coffee house kind of a thing. Went to the Bluebird Cafe a few times, early show, because it was free. The early show, late show was a cover charge. We couldn't afford that. Found out pretty early from the Bluebird Cafe, it answered that question of, so how good is good? And I found out how good was. And I can drive down 21st these days past that strip where the Bluebird Cafe is, and I can physically feel what I felt then once I knew how good was and how far from good I was.
Mm-hmm. So for people that are listening that are not familiar with the Bluebird Cafe, that is pretty much the pinnacle of songwriting in Nashville. Mm-hmm. If you want, it's this tiny little building that's like in a strip mall, right?
Yep.
It's just, you pass it, and if you don't know it, you would never know it's even there.
Yep.
But people line up and it sells out every single night pretty much. Mm-hmm. And the best songwriters in the world come to play the Bluebird Cafe and share their songs, and just, and this little tiny, you can get maybe 100 people in it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
It's what the whole show Nashville was kind of centered around that.
Yeah. So,
and hear acoustic versions of either these great songs you've heard on the radio, hear them stripped down, or something new that they wanted to play. Mm-hmm. And so we went a couple of nights and just, going out in the parking lot, just defeated. Like, I have really made a mistake. I need to probably pack up. And yet also there's just something in the spirit and soul of a writer. You get beat down and you get back up again. I was standing in that parking lot, walking out of it, and just like, a January wind coming down 21st, it would hit me and it would just kind of snap me back to attention. I go, well, I've come this far. Let's hang in there. Let's give it a try. Crush, pick up, just that thing. But it kind of was the education for me too, of getting to hear other writers and going, so I've got to, that's the level. Okay. That, at least with that, I had an answer that I didn't have living out of town.
Okay, yeah,
just listening to the radio.
Sure, yeah.
That's what I got there. Also, there were just songwriting opportunities to learn better. ASCAP, the American Society of Composers and Performers, was offering a series of workshops on Tuesday nights, where they had a host, and one night they had a panel of publishers, one night they had a panel of writers, one night they had some A&R guys come in, and they, as part of, I got accepted for that, and as part of that, they critiqued a song of yours publicly. And
so you became a member of ASCAP? Of
ASCAP.
Before this had happened?
I did.
Correct, yeah.
And pretty much in order to...
So that you
get to be a part of that.
Right, do those things. So then you had to submit a song, right?
And then on some Tuesday night in that boardroom with about 30 or 40 people in there, they played my piano vocal work tape way too loud for me to be comfortable with. And then it was a couple of writers and publishers on that night. And then they talked to me directly for about 10 minutes about it and sliced and diced that song up. And that was the most educational 10 minutes of my songwriting career up to that point. Suddenly, things that they were saying, I was like, well, of course. Oh, that's right. Oh, yeah, I did make that mistake. Okay. It's just like suddenly this thing that seemed all right to me, I saw it in completely a different light, and so grateful for that. I was not defensive about that. I was not precious with the song. I was just so grateful for their wisdom and also the kindness in their spirit. And just, they weren't attacking me. They were just saying, hey, as a craftsperson, consider this next time. And got to one night on the last night, a couple of the writers said, hey, after this, if we're going to go down to Shoney's when it was still on Demumber down there at the end, and just grab some dessert and coffee if anybody wants to come and hang. And so, I went there and just sitting in a booth, just learning just the stuff that they talked about. That was so educational for me. Grateful for that.
Yeah, so getting to go hang out at Shoney's with the publishers and and
a couple of writers.
Yeah, that are the ones that are basically
Niles
judging.
Borup and Dwight Lyles, particularly, just were they had a place in their heart for new writers and a teaching spirit, and were just kind of willing to hang.
That's the best thing that you could have ever hoped for at that point for any writer, for someone further down the road from them to say, hey, come hang out with me and let's just sit and talk.
Yeah.
To build a relationship with them. I mean, that's invaluable.
So appreciate that.
Yeah, that's invaluable for that kind of stuff. Especially for new writers coming into town. It's like that's what we dream of.
Yeah.
Is for someone like that to say, hey, come hang out with me.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Because that's one of the hardest things. When I first moved to town 20 plus years ago, I didn't know anybody. Thankfully I had an internship lined up for me when I got here that I had to go interview for, but I got it, and I immediately found my group of people that I have known for the past 20 years that are still some of my best friends, and we're all still doing music, in some form or fashion, and we're at different places in our lives and our careers. But, I know that at any moment I can go back to any of those people and catch up with them or say, hey, I need a favor, or hey, what can I do for you, or whatever. And they'll all be like, sure, yeah, what can I do? Or yes, I need this. How can, what can we do for each other, kind of a thing. So the fact that you've got that from someone, to kind of help jumpstart you and give you some new ideas and a new direction, is fantastic. And that's what people that are listening really need to know, that they're to be looking for those types of opportunities.
And just to pick their brain and see how they think and what's their opinion about some songs. Let's talk shop. That was the thing, is like I had nobody to talk shop with, and but they would just I appreciate that that was a foundational connections for me in this town.
So once you had that opportunity, what would you say was sort of the turning point that kind of, you notice, okay, from that moment you got sliced and diced one night on your song, and then all of a sudden there's a shift. Where does that shift happen, and how do you know that's happening?
Yeah, for me that came a few weeks after that conference was over at ASCAP, because a significant moment in that, I can't remember if it was Dwight or Niles that said, as a part of the panel one night, they said the hardest meeting in Nashville to get with a publisher is not the first meeting. The hardest meeting to get is the second meeting. Well, that was soul crushing to me right there too, because I'm an introvert. I've known that. I've always been. Like I said, I don't want to be a performer. I don't want to be up on stage. I'd rather be in a small room like this with one or two other people and just hang. I love people a lot. I just don't want big groups of them like that. So for them to say that, it terrified me. It's like, so you're saying I'm going to have to summon up the courage at some point to initiate with the publisher. And if I blow it that one time, it's going to be harder to get the second meeting. because I knew the names of the publishers in town. I knew I was a credit reader from a long way back, CCM magazine, stuff like that. I knew who was at the various companies around town, and I knew I need a champion, and I need one of these 4 or 5 people in this town to believe in me, and if I blow it the first time, that's awful. It terrified me. And I spent a month or 2 just thinking about that. How do I deal with that? How do I work with that? I knew I would not know if I was ready to approach a publisher. How do you know if you're ready to approach a publisher? Okay, is there anybody who can tell me if I'm ready to approach the publisher? Okay. So that's kind of where the game plan came to be. I had met Tom Long, who was the membership representative at ASCAP, who hosted the conference that I had gone to. So that was like my first professional ever call up somebody on the phone and ask something. And I was like, Tom, it's Tony Wood. We've met, but you certainly won't remember me because I sat in the back of the class and didn't say very much. But you remember Dwight and I said this about the second meeting was harder to get. So at some point I need to approach a publisher. I need to know when I'm ready. Deep breath. Tom, will you be that man for me? Will you tell me when I'm ready? And he's like, well, I don't really know that anybody's ever asked me that, but I'll tell you what, every few months, swing by here, show me the latest things that you've written, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Made an appointment, about 2 months later. And like I said, I had stopped writing complete songs at that point. So I was just writing lyrics, just here's a lyric typed out on a sheet of paper. Maybe I can get in a room with somebody who goes, oh, this is how that was sung. Because, I'd known that was how Bernie Taupin did it with Elton John. All of those hit songs were lyrics first, which is, if you read some of those lyrics and think, how do you write Benny and the Jets just as a lyric on page? And that really speaks to the brilliance of Elton John's melodies to make such hooks out of words on paper like that. Okay. But I thought, well, maybe I can find somebody out there like that. So I took the meeting with Tom, go in, lay 3 pieces of typed paper on his desk, stand there, try not to squirm or scratch or anything.
These are just lyrics. This is not
just
there's
lyric.
no melody. Or
there's no melody.
You don't have a recording or anything like
Nothing. I hear rhythm and cadence and all of that in my head. I don't hear good melody.
Okay.
So, Tom reads them and he says, I know some people you need to meet. Get in the car.
Wow. This is the first meeting with him?
Oh yeah. And I've told the story before. I said, Tom, I got to take a minute. And I went in the bathroom. I shut the stall, and I cried like a baby. I cried so hard, overwhelmed and terrified too, because it's like, okay, this is that meeting that I knew was eventually down the road at some point.
Yeah.
At least Tom says maybe I'm ready. It's really more Tom's reputation on it. But I don't want to be that loser that he trots around town either. We go to the first meeting. They read it. No thanks. We go to the second meeting. They read them. No thanks. We go to the third meeting. They read the lyrics. No thanks. We go to the fourth meeting. A guy named Michael Purrier, who was a part of Lorenz Creative Services at that time. Small independent on Music Row, 40 Music Square East. I'll never forget. It's funny, you're looking at there is a picture down at the bottom right there on my wall. That is the door to Lorenz right there. That is the door that I walked through that changed my life. Wow. Because Michael is a publisher, but he's also a writer and more of a lyric writer too. And he didn't say no. He said, well, why don't you start hanging around and let me see if I can get some of my writers to write with you. And Marty, my life changed right there. Not miraculously and not completely in the moment, but there's a pivot in my whole story right there by walking through that door and what he said to me that day. So, by that point I had a church job here in West Nashville, 50 hours a week with kids writing. We had started our family. I basically have Thursdays off. So I start going down there on some Thursdays. And somebody had said along the way, you need to drink the publisher's coffee. And I thought, okay, so I'll show up at 10 o'clock on Thursdays and look like I'm busy doing something and drink a little coffee and hang out. And he started getting a couple of guys, newer writers at that time. And we started writing songs. And about 6 months of that, and he called me at church on a Friday and said, hey, swing by at the end of the day today, like 5 o'clock Friday on my drive home from church. Went by Music Row. Really fortunate, the goodness of God, that I was like 12 minutes from Music Row writing the church that I got. So fortunate with that. And he called me in. He goes, hey, let's get married. Here's a deal. Sign it. And so that was my first writing deal, April the 1st, 1990.
Wow. Now, what was it do you know what it was that made him make that decision to say, okay, let's do this? Was there a certain song that you had written with the other writers that just kind of connected, or was it the culmination of those 6 months of working together? Do you know what made him?
I think it was multiple songs. It was just like, okay, he's consistently turning in songs that are kind of like at this level. Fortunately, some wagers that I had made turned out to be true. He put me in rooms with guys that were good melody guys, and they would take the things that were on those typed pages and they would sing them out. Now, we made changes along the way, added syllables, take away syllables to make it work. But by and large, they made them work. And Michael liked some of the songs. Nothing at that point was recorded or anything. And it actually took probably about another year after that point, year and a half, before I got like my first song on any record ever.
What was your first cut?
First cut ever was on the Southern gospel group Gold City.
Okay.
A record called, I think it was called Answer the Call, a song called When We Gather at the Table. Written as like a Steve Green pitch. At that point, when late 80s, early 90s in this town, kind of the Sandy Patty, Larnell Harris, and Steve Green dominated the radio at that point, and I thought it was going to be like a Steve Green song, and it ended up getting cut by Southern gospel artists, which kind of like my first couple, 2 or 3 songs. But there's that place where very church music, it works in both worlds very much, and my first couple of cuts were Southern gospel. I was like, I don't think I was a Southern gospel songwriter, but some of them landed there. But then started getting some cuts and radio singles that were more on the AC adult contemporary, the more pop side of what was on radio at that point. Wrote for Michael for 7 years. Really nice things happened to me during that. Started getting songs on records, started getting some songs on radio, started meeting artists. Really significant relationship early on for me was he showed me a green cassette one day of this college student from Seattle that had sent in him. He goes, and Michael's like, I think I like his melodies a lot. But he needs some help as a songwriter. Here's a new guy, Scott Krippayne. I think he's coming to town. You want to write with him? And so we hooked up very early, developed a deep friendship, a great collaboration together. That guy was just gifted melodically, just that thing of everything I don't hear, he just pours out of him so easily. So we really hunkered down, wrote a lot of songs, started to get on records together. Fortunately for me, he got a record deal with Word during that time, and so we got to start writing for him. And between songs on his record and started getting some songs on Point of Grace records at that point that were doing records that were doing well. Yeah. Started opening up broader doors for relationships and co-writes and things like that for me.
Scott Krippayne's first album,
Wild Imagination.
Yeah, what was the first the big single off of that, the first big one. Do you remember?
First single ever off that record was a song called "All My Days" that he wrote. The second single off of that was called "Sometimes He Calms the Storm."
Sometimes He calms the storm. That song right there. Did you co-write that one with him?
No, I wrote that and he did not.
You wrote that one?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Hang on. Let me just take a moment because I love that song. Now, I should have already known this about you, that you wrote this song, but I didn't. So I'll put my ignorance on tape for the world to know that I did not realize that you'd written that song. And I'm the guy who, I'm like you, I'm a credits guy.
Yeah.
I love reading. And so at some point in my life, whenever I first had that album and was reading through it, I would have known that. But that would have been a long time ago. But that song was so powerful. I love that song. So thank you for putting that out into the world.
There was a journey on that one. It was I wrote that lyric while I was still at church here. I was teaching through the book of Matthew to the kids on Wednesday night, and I kind of realized, like, wait, there's these two incidents in the book of Matthew where the same thing happened, but Jesus responded differently in these two situations when the storm comes up and they're in boats, and carried it for a couple of weeks. I wrote the lyrics. It was such a songwriting moment. I'm in Hickory Hollow Mall on a Saturday afternoon shopping with my wife, and the song hits. And it's like, okay, I know how to write it. She roots in her purse, gives me like the electric bill. I sit out in the middle of the mall and just I basically wrote probably 85% of that lyric on the back of that envelope. Sent it to a buddy I was writing with some at that point, also Kevin Stokes. We wrote the song. Okay, doubling back to ASCAP at this point. Okay. This would have been 94, 95. I'd probably been a staff writer about 4 years, begun to meet. Scott and I were starting to write. They had a thing where they invited 12 writers to come in, play one song each, and there was a table with all the A&R guys in the front of it. And it was like, and I was invited to do that. It was like, okay, decision time for me. I want them to like my song. Therefore, I cannot perform it myself because that's not going to help my cause in any way. Scott, will you go as my friend and sing my song for me? And he was like, oh yeah, I'll do that. So we go in, he sits at the piano. It's a live performance. Some artists, some writers got songs put on hold. I got that song put on hold that day out of that meeting for Susan Ashton. They were doing, I think probably like her greatest hits record at about that time. Yeah. Third or fourth record in, and that was put on hold and held for a long time before the record came out. They ended up not cutting it on Susan. Scott had gotten his deal on Word. John Mays had been on the panel that day, and as they're putting the record together, he's like, "Hey Scott, that Storm song you did at ASCAP that day, man, I think maybe you ought to record that." And Scott was like, "I didn't write that one." Scott wrote everything on his record, on every record, I think, except that one song. And that was kind of like their battle going back and forth for a while. And finally, Scott gave in to John Mays on that and recorded the song. And it was his first number one as an artist. I was so grateful for his version of it. It just felt like the right voice for the right song.
Oh, it was. And the rest of the world thanks you both for it, for doing that. So, because it's such a good song. So when you start working with other writers, because you admittedly you're not won't consider yourself a singer or necessarily a melody person, you're a lyric guy. Mm-hmm. But as you've started writing with people at this point and been doing this for a few years, does that help you become a melody writer? Like, are you starting to hear melodies in your head that you can have confidence in yourself putting the lyric and the melody together, without the help of another person?
It does. My skills have become better at reacting to what's in it. I'm not a good initiator of melody, but if we're sitting in working on a song and you play, I mean, hey, what if you play the 4 chord there instead of the 1 chord? Okay. Or hey, what if the melody goes up to this note or something? So you do it as long as I have been in the room, watched them birth, watch how people get there. You do learn some things along the way.
Sure.
But I still don't just sit down and start a song, lyric and music by myself. But there are pieces of songs.
Even today?
Yeah, there's songs that have gotten out that I go, I know that was my piece of melody.
Okay.
As we were working and they were singing one thing, and I was like, hey, what if we sang this instead? And that ended up kind of being a big part of a hook that made it. So there's songs, there is, that happens. Mm-hmm. But
so you wrote for that company for 7 years.
7 years.
I've asked this with other writers who are signed to publishing companies. I'm just curious to get some different opinions. Mm-hmm. What makes a writer leave one company that they've been with for years to go to another company? Like, what's your experience with that? If you can give that information.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors in all of that. That company had been bought along the way, and personnel changes, and
so loyalty is no longer there like it was to some degree, maybe.
It wasn't exactly the same setup. Okay. It wasn't the same group of people. You know, personnel come and go. I am deeply loyal to people, to champions along the way. But there also just comes a time creatively where you may need to make a change for your own self. You just need, I like to move the furniture around in a room just for the sake of change. But I don't jump from company to company very quickly. 7 years is among the shortest stays that I've ever had. I've ever been somewhere. So, this is my 30th year as a staff writer. So, wow. 4 deals in the midst of that, but most of them were at least 7 years. So,
who all have you written for? What companies?
Companies. First one, like I said, was Lorenz Creative Services, but then they were bought by BMG.
Okay.
Then I signed to Benson Company, which within about the same amount of time, but within about the first or second year, they merged in with Brentwood and became Brentwood Benson Publishing, which is a large company. After that, I wrote 6-7 years for. It's changed names several times. It's really Sony's Christian division. It's Essential Music now. It's tied in with Provident. And then 6 years ago, I went to Word, which was then bought by Curb.
So is it Curb Word or Word Curb? I've heard it both ways.
I don't know. It's just
some configuration of the two.
That feels like about everywhere I go, it ends up getting bought. So you get that there's company. You sign with a group of people in an organization, and you know how it runs, and then it changes. I mean, it's not good or bad. It's just.
Sure.
It just is what it is.
Yeah. When you go from one company to the next, do you find it that it's easier? Like when you went from the first company to the second company and then second to the third, was it an easier transition each time because you've had the more experience and you've got more cuts and people know who you are and you've got some reputation for...
And you just relax and you learn that life goes on. That first one was so dramatic for me. I was like... Am I making the biggest mistake of my life?
Oh, the first time you switched companies?
First time I went to a new company. It was that was a dramatic moment in life for me also because just for reasons, God has been real gracious in my story, and that when doors were closing, seasons were shutting down, I just knew it, and it was very clear that you need to make a transition here. And that my 7th year at BMG Lorenz, as that was wrapping up, was also like my 9th year on church staff. And I had graduated 2 groups of kids through high school, ton of seniors out the door, not many juniors and sophomores, but a ton of freshmen. It was really time on that front to hunker down and redream that thing. And it was also in the same window when I was starting to have some songs on some records, on some records that were doing well, and some singles and stuff. And I had more writing opportunities than I could. I mean, truly, for that 7 years, I had written 2 sessions every Thursday. But then, because for a lot of that, Scott and a couple of other guys also had day jobs that they were doing. We wrote a lot at night, or I would write a lyric and just send it to him, and he'd write it and shoot me back a tape of it. So, we wrote a lot of songs. We just didn't write them all between 10 and 5 weekdays because we were buying groceries for our families. So as the BMG's thing shut down, it was kind of that first window of there were opportunities that I'm not going to step out and do this full time as a songwriter, which again is a part of that adventure thing of like coming to town. It didn't make 100% sense to do that. It did not make financial sense on paper. And yet once again, my wife was up for the adventure and didn't hold me back in any of that. But we prayed and we sought God and all that. It wasn't a foolish thing. Sometimes faith and foolishness feel real similar. You don't know, but sometimes He really does call you to make that jump. And we didn't do it casually or on a whim. We really did sense His leading in that. So jumped in with Benson writing full time at that point.
I think that harkens back a little bit to what you're saying earlier when you first moved to Nashville and you're having to get temp jobs to get started. And we don't talk about that much on the podcast because, the title is You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry. Yeah. But in order to get to that point of being able to make a full-time living doing it, you have to work your way up to it. It's not an automatic thing. You come to town and you're just automatically doing it. And, you got a good career going for most people. So, the fact that you did temp jobs. So for people that don't know what a temp job is, there are companies around Nashville, around big cities that have, Ronstadt and different, because I did it.
Yeah.
I worked at these different temp jobs, and they would call you and say, hey, we need you to come work for so-and-so for the week, and you go do it. And then you can, it gives you some income. Right. So that while you're working on your music career on the side, you've got income to take care of you and your family until those things start to take off, so that you did that. And then you got the church job. And so you're doing that while as you get into the music career and build it up until it gets to a point that you can level one over the other, and,
well, guys, you see, I'm about to laugh with what you're saying, because what happened in that time was, as I was about to sign the deal with Benson, it was the end of August. And we'd negotiated the deal, and they were like, "Oh, we'll have you the final copy in 2 weeks." And I was like, "Okay, that's great." So I gave my 2 weeks notice at church. This is going to all work out really well. Dovetail together. Quit that. They came back and said, "Hey, we've hit a little bit of a bump in this. It's going to take a little bit to work out some things, but we'll be getting it to you." Well, 2 weeks go by in September. Into October.
So no job.
No income. Church is gone. Any songwriting royalties were really recouping my previous publishing deal. They'd just been paying me a little bit, but royalties really hadn't started rolling, on any of that.
And this is after 7 years, right?
Yeah.
So we'll need to talk about that here in a minute.
Well, but it just takes a while for money to start getting down the pipeline. Yeah. And I didn't, my first few years too, it's just a few cuts, and it's small cuts and songs that just don't earn very much. And so in this window, I did not sign. I left the church 1st of September, and they had said, we'll have a paper for you to sign in 2 weeks. Well, we signed the 1st of January.
So 3 or 4 months gone by.
Months go by, and so I go back to the temp jobs.
Yeah,
there was one of the temp jobs. I mean, you try not to let it be humiliating, and but it makes you go, God, what's up with this? God, what's up? I think I listened to you. I think I followed you. There was a new Christian bookstore starting, and one of the temp agencies sent people there to start putting together the display cases and stocking the shelves. And Marty, there's a day where I'm in there opening the boxes, putting records on the shelf that I've got songs on.
Wow.
And watching guys from those companies come in to meet with the people there as it's all coming together. And they're like, I knew you was a writer. What are you doing this? Yeah, man, trust God. And you try not to, it's a tough moment, but you do what you have to.
Right. And, and I told you, like, when I was walking in here to your place, I used to, and I've talked about this before, that I delivered pizzas for 6 years here in Brentwood area. And actually this neighborhood that we're in right now was in my delivery area. So I've delivered pizzas all over around this place where we are right now. And there's another guest that has been on the show in the first season, Mark Irwin, songwriter that know him.
Great writer.
Mark came and got a job where I worked delivering pizzas, and he had been a hit songwriter. And, he wrote Here in the Real World with Alan Jackson, his first big single, for Alan, and it's like, wait, so why are you here delivering pizzas when you're a huge songwriter? And, and we've talked about this on the show, so I'm not giving away anything that doesn't need to be said, but, basically I think a deal had fallen apart or was in the process of transitioning to another publisher like you had done at some point. And so he just needed some extra income at the time. Boy. But man, I'm super grateful that he went through that phase in life, because that allowed us to meet and become friends. And we started writing together, and so that built a relationship with someone that I would have never had, outside of that opportunity, and then eventually we both got back on our feet to the point that we didn't have to, to do those side jobs, and we can do music full time in what we do. So that's just part of it. So people that are listening need to realize that even though that's what the show is about, you have to work your way up to that, and you have to be able to still do stuff, while you're building. And even if you
get to a point, there's no guarantee of sustaining it at that point.
You have
to be willing to do what it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
because my kids wanted food. They just keep wanting to eat groceries and wear clothes.
It's a weird thing, right?
You got to just... Again, here we go.
So let's go back a little bit and talk about 7+ years, and you're having the money still really hasn't rolled in yet. You're getting hit singles out on the radio, but yet your money is just the money that's coming in is recouping your deal or whatever. So like, what would you tell people to expect? I mean, I know it's a different world that we live in now musically than it was back in the early mid 90s. That was pretty much the heyday of music,
of record selling.
Right. So,
so that even if you didn't get the singles, you were still on some records that were selling pretty well.
Right. So, but even back then, okay, so that's even a bigger point. You're on, you're at the height of record sales ever in music, pretty much, is in the mid 90s, I guess. And you've got songs, some singles, you got some deep cuts on these different albums, and those were really making a lot of money, and it's still taking you 7+ years to really kind of get that rolling, correct?
Yeah.
So what do you tell people that are wanting to get into this game, who want to be songwriters? What to expect?
It's doing it for the love of it, that you cannot not do it. I'm going to do this whether they pay me or not. The difference now is the single is everything. There is not a cut 7 to be had, and a real difference now, at least in the Christian market, is more of the assumption that the artist will be a writer on the song. So you will need to find a relationship with an artist, kind of as your point of introduction. Maybe somebody new that you find here in town that you really connect with and grow up with them. That's the way. That's kind of the only open door I see for people now.
Is building a relationship with a new writer,
with a new artist
as they come in.
Yeah.
Now, and do you find that? I mean, granted, you are with a publishing company, so they're setting up rights for you.
Right.
So they're you get the publisher that's out connecting you with these new artists to write with them. Mm-hmm. What if you don't have a publishing deal and you're a writer and you're like, how do I can't get into a publishing company because I don't have a relationship with a writer with an artist. Yeah. So how do you?
It's fun. I grab coffee a number of times of the year with people who have graduated with songwriting degrees from, Belmont, Trevecca, Liberty, places like that. So I've met a number of those, and that's exactly the situation that they're in. And I'm always talking about trying to find who's the new talent, who's coming up with you. I mean, we always aspire to write with who is ahead of us. I knew who the artist. I would love to hear them sing something someday. And yet, look at my story. I happened to come through the door at the same time as Scott and 3 or 4 other guys introduced to this town. And that's kind of the way it happened. Who you come through the door with, you find a degree of success with. Mm-hmm. So it's meeting, and I don't know how you find them. You hang out at a lot of writers' nights at night. This town is full of people playing. Not as much Christian events as others, but sometimes there's some events like that. And just finding on social media, labels are scouring social media all day to find who's new talent rising up. That would be part of how you'd have to connect now. Find somebody else who's as serious about it as you are. And is there a way that what you do can complement what they do?
Mm-hmm. What do you think about a person, a writer coming, moves to town, and they're looking for their first deal? They don't know anybody yet. And kind of like you, when you first moved, I didn't know really anybody. I quickly met my group of people because I had that internship with that indie label. Mm-hmm. And so that afforded me the opportunity to get to know people very quickly. But you didn't when you first came to town. You had your way of doing it. What would you tell people at this point? Again, it's a different world than it was in the mid 80s, I think, when you moved here, right? So it's a different sort of scenario of how the music world works. But if somebody wants to connect with a publisher, what would you say at this point?
It's either going to take a large song or great song that kind of becomes your calling card for everybody along the way. There's a song or two that steps you to a little higher plateau. You said earlier, sometimes you call it a storm. That was a significant song for me along the way in that I met other writers through that song because they came up. I remember the day I'd never met Joel Lindsay before. He was a writer at Benson while I was, but I was seeing his name on some records and really liked what it was. And I'll never forget the night he walked up and said, "Hey, I'm Joel Lindsay. I know you wrote that Storm song." I really like that. And then we just became a great friendship and collaboration for a lot of years. So you need that calling card kind of a song for you. It's funny. I feel like I see more music track production guys getting their foot in the door. Mm-hmm. There's just always going to be the need for new people willing to do demos. That's the way I watch so many guys get their foot in, willing to do kind of the grunt work and make these songs sound good, but then it also gets their work heard and it ultimately gets them a pub deal. It may be a little harder for the lyric-based person these days.
If that's all your main thing is lyrics, because and that's where you're saying they want you to connect with new artists that are coming up, so that they, because back in the day when you were kind of starting out or sort of in the middle of your career at that point, or early parts of your career, you could do that. That was a normal thing because a lot of the artists didn't write their music, right? They were only singers.
Right.
They were the artists and they sang the songs, but they would have to have songwriters bring songs to them, and they would record your songs.
Right.
And that was the normal way it was done way back in the day.
Yeah, I would say probably half of the Christian music
I think
community artists at that point, they accepted outside songs. So you would get two to three writers together, write songs. I mean, Point of Grace was massive for people in this town, for staff writers to, they cut 10 songs on a record. And I know there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of songs written competing for those 10 slots on a record, because those records were selling too, and the ministry platform. Everybody believed in what they were doing and what God was doing through them. It's like, hey, get in the room with God and go, how can we serve that? Is there a way we can write something that connects with them and their story, and God use it out there in America somehow? Yeah. So I miss that. There are occasionally opportunities for that these days. That still exists some in Southern gospel music. There's a chance to write songs that can be picked up by a group or a singer that doesn't write their own. But I miss that.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just in Christian music. I think most genres are that way nowadays.
Yeah.
You have to have the artist connection as well. So again, as we look around the room here, I'm seeing Reba McEntire, Jason Crabb, Zach Williams, Francesca Battistelli. Who else? Let me look around here. Johnny Diaz, Seventh Time Down. There's all kinds of stuff. You've written lots and lots of songs for lots and lots of artists. What was it like for you, just to kind of give us a feeling of, because Reba was huge already, right?
Yeah. When she did her first gospel record 4 or 5 years back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you get your first Reba cut, or your first, who was the first big artist that you got to write for, that recorded your song, that you had always hoped would maybe record your song? Do you remember?
That's a great question. Wow.
There's been so many.
I am so grateful for every cut, because anytime anybody chooses your song, golly,
Sure.
what a crazy win that is. I'll go with first thing off the top of my head. During the early '90s was kind of that point where Point of Grace, For Him, Phillips, Craig, and Dean came along. All of that, the Avalon. It was kind of a lot of the pop vocal groups thing. And I always loved that. I just loved how church that was, and how pop that was, and how radio that was. Did not get songs on early For Him records because they had kind of their team that they were writing with, but things changed, and got the opportunity to submit a couple of lyrics for Mark Harris to take a look at along the way, and he sent back guitar vocals of him singing some of the songs. Okay. And then and ended up when they changed their deal and went to and signed with Word instead of Benson, the Walk On record had some songs on that, and their first single and their relaunch kind of through Word. And that was I loved what they did, and that was a fun one. You said Reba, good grief, come on, that's an iconic voice to go, and I wrote those lines.
Yeah,
that's just that's fun.
Yeah, and you've written with Michael W.
Oh
Smith,
gosh, that okay.
Oh,
yeah.
that guy.
That was sure one on a Christmas record and a big orchestral thing, a song called "Son of God" that he and David Hamilton had a melody and sent it over and said, "Do I want to take a run at it?" And we need it. So we need it by Thursday.
Let's think about this for a second. So Michael's got and the other guy, I've got the
David
song
Hamilton's
idea.
Producing the record.
Okay, and they reach out. They say, "Hey, let's see if Tony wants to write." Now, had you written for Michael before at this point?
I had not. I had gotten to know David through something. We had David and I had written he had produced a Sandy Patty record, and we had written a song for that. And David reached out and said, "I've got this melody I'm working on with Michael. We're cutting it, and I need a lyric in about 48 hours. Can It's funny when you ask that. It's like what comes back to mind, songs along the way, because that's years ago. Okay, that was. I wrote the bulk of that at that kitchen table right through there on a crazy day when my wife was out of town. We were supposed to leave that Friday on a trip somewhere, and there was something weird electrical had happened at this house. Like the microwave blew up, and then something else went out, and we thought there was an electrical problem in here. The power company is out on the street working on the lines. Somebody else is in here checking the wiring at different places. And I am trying to get that Christmas lyric written in August at that point, racing the deadline. So that song feels like it was just chaos around it, but it made the record. I'm grateful.
Well, that's awesome. So what do you know, like at what point in your career, as writers, we're always wanting to get our song out, hoping that an artist will record it, hoping that a major label artist will record it, that's already had success. That people already know it's Reba or it's Michael W. or whoever. Yeah. Do you remember at what point in your career the first time an artist reached out to you like that to say, hey, we want you to write a song either with us, with me, or for me, in that same sort of context? Was that your first time that someone had reached out to you to do that? Or do you remember the first time that happened?
I don't. It's somewhere along the way you're writing with writers, and then occasionally you get artists in the room, and then you're back to writers. And I don't remember the first.
Yeah, sure.
I'll tell you. Okay, here's a first one that was significant and terrifying to me, and it's not going to mean anything to you. There was a guy, going back to my church growing up, there was a songbook called Sing and Celebrate that our youth choir sang out of, compiled by Ralph Carmichael and Kurt Kaiser. Kurt Kaiser wrote, "Pass it on. It only takes a spark to get a fire going." You would know that, but in the 70s and 80s, a million youth groups sang that song. Kurt also wrote, "Oh, How He Loves You and Me."
Yeah.
Oh, big song from everywhere. My first or second year at Lorenz, Michael Purrier says, "Hey, there's a guy coming to town he had been vice president of Word in Waco, and he's coming down and he wants to write some songs. Will you spend a Thursday with him?" And I walked in the room with Kurt Kaiser, who was the guy who had written everything I had sung in youth choir 2 years. I mean, terrifying. Just, if he had said, "I'm Kurt Kaiser and I wrote Pass It On, How He Loves You and Me, and you're Tony Wood and you've never had a song recorded," at this point I'd go, "Yep, that pretty well sums it up right there. You're exactly right." And he could not have been kinder and sweeter and more honoring to me. Oh my gosh. Just what I learned from that. I was like, I want to be that for people.
Sure.
Just loved that man.
Well, I think that's encouraging to hear, because people that want to do this, and we all moved to town and we're all scared to death. Yeah. That we're going to, we got these people that we want to meet, that we want to connect with, that we want to impress with our songs and hope that they like it, and we're terrified that they're going to not like us. Yeah. Or that they're going to be just rude or whatever. And 98% of the time, they're actually really kind people, right? Yeah. And
I have found that the artists I've gotten with are really sincere, genuine, great people, that I've loved them from a distance on the radio, and then you sit in a room with them and you just love them even more. Okay, you're funny. You're talking about, it's kind of like getting through the terror. Right. Of, okay, this is that moment. The one that just pops back to me right now was Wayne Watson. I was a big Wayne Watson fan. Just as far as a singer-songwriter, what a catalog of great songs. And had the opportunity to get with him one time. And I just sitting here having this conversation, Marty, I feel my terror walking into the room that day, because you want to find that way to connect, and I find just goofy humor is often It's a good bridge. So we're sitting there over coffee just in those first 10 minutes, and I don't know why I did it, but for some stupid reason, you remember the old SNL skit where Chris Farley is interviewing Paul McCartney, and he is the most awkward spastic, and he goes, and then you wrote "Let It Be," right? And McCartney's just deadpanning, yes. Awesome. Right. And Farley is so spastic and all. And somehow in the midst of that with Wayne, I slipped into that character and I just committed and I just went with it. And then you wrote, Jesus, friend of a wounded heart, right? And he goes, yeah. And I go, awesome. And Wayne awesome. Laughed and just laughed at that. And it was the beginning of a great day and a good songwriting session.
Breaks the ice.
It really did. I committed. I could have died on that hill right there if he hadn't, but it turned out to be a good day.
Yeah, because that's what you're always scared of, that you're the person that is like your hero, right? You get the opportunity to spend time with this person.
Yeah.
And then
they think I'm a jerk.
Right. Yeah, they end up not liking you, or you don't like them, or something happens. You're just like, man, that's such a disappointment. But but that's fantastic. Man, this is so good. What do you have? They're all your favorites. I understand. Every song's a favorite, and every artist is a favorite that they get to do your stuff. For any of us. That being said,
yeah, because all of them have some of your blood in it. It's dishonest if you don't bring you to the table and to the session and put a little bit of your blood. Now, you can't bleed out in every song, so there are those that are a little bit more.
Yeah,
that's me.
Are there any artists that stick out to you that have just been like the Wayne Watson thing? You know, or what are some of the other artists that have been like, this is it. I love it. This has been some of your favorite cuts that you've been able to have.
You know what? Any song that has had a connection to my family has been important to me. Mark Harris and I wrote a thing called "Find Your Wings," and it really was a prayer that we wrote for over our children. Of course, that's a deeply personal song to me. Whenever my wife gets frustrated, stuff on the computer stuff, she goes, man, this is the stuff that drives me crazy. And I wrote that down at some point and kind of got that on a Francesca Battistelli record.
Yep,
kind of
remember that one.
Goofy, fun song. But it's like, no, that's because my wife says that 10,000 times. And so stuff like that, when I hear that and go, man, that's just, those songs mean something else to people out there in Nebraska. But to me, I hear my family in that. And so that means a lot to me.
Yeah, that's so good. What's some advice that you would give? Just, I don't want to wrap up. I just want to sit and keep talking. I could sit and talk with you for hours doing this kind of stuff. But what would be some things that you would tell writers, whether they're new writers, whether they're they're published writers right now, or they're working writers and they're having some success? Again, it's a different world that we live in now. It's all singles based and as opposed to album based or whatever. But just in the state of the music business currently,
and yet we set that up as that's a frustration, and yet it's never been a level playing field. It's always been something wrong with the music business, and yet in the midst of that, God's going to do what He's going to do. Songs are going to find ways to people. Yes, is there frustration? Sometimes, oh my gosh, it's still. You never get used to the rejection. You learn to live with it and not be crippled by it, and you walk on. But I still believe, as much as I ever did, the right song will find the right heart, and God will do with it what He plans to do, whether bring hope and encouragement to somebody or to give them words to worship with in a way that they haven't. I feel like you've got to know who you know God to be and write that. How have you experienced Him in your life and in the circles around you? Who have you seen Him to be? Write what you know. Be mindful of the marketplace, but don't just write something you think other people will sing. Where is that place where it's got some of your blood, some of you in it. I also and work on your theology. Read books, listen to sermons that help you to grow in your faith. And sometimes, to me, that's not the most popular stuff. Just find books by some dead people that go a little bit deeper than current pop stuff, and then fill yourself with that, and then let that bleed out into your songs.
It's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mark.
That's things that I need to go back and apply in my own life, as a writer. And we're always learning.
Yeah.
There's always,
I learn from everybody that I'm in the room with.
That's one of the selfish reasons I do this podcast, because I get an opportunity to sit with guys like you and learn some things, and go either learn something new or be reminded of something that I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
Which
is why guys like me listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's fantastic. What would you tell people? Somebody wants to reach out and write with an established writer, whether it's a new writer or, someone who's kind of getting their feet wet in the whole thing. And there's a writer that they really want to write with. Mm-hmm. Somebody wants to write with Tony Wood, right? Mm-hmm. And you've been doing this for 30 years. What do you write with new artists? Will you, on their own? Do they have to go, if you say, yeah, I'll do that, but you got to go through my publisher to set it up? How does that typically work for you?
Most of the stuff that's on my calendar these days, particularly with new people, goes through my publisher. If there's a new writer, a new artist that they think I should get with, I'll do that easily. I always, meet people at conferences, and there's got to be a reason to write. It's got to be that they show me a piece of a song that is so good. I go, oh, I love that. Oh, I know how to finish that. And I know where we can go with that. Mm-hmm. It's not just that we could finish it, but if we don't have a place to go with it, well, I've got 800 of those songs that I know how to write it. I just don't know what to do with it once it's done. But if I can see, I'm open to new relationships all the time, because I don't know where the next good song is going to be coming from. Mm-hmm. If I gave somebody permission, if they just reached out and submit something to me through my website or something, I'm not gonna take that. I'm not gonna work on that, because then there's this concern that they will find that title somewhere in my catalog and think I took it from them.
Right.
But if I heard somebody's song somewhere, I did that one time. Gosh, I did that with a Phillips, Craig and Dean single. I heard a guy playing a song out, and I thought that chorus is right and that verse is absolutely wrong. And told my publisher at the time, and she was like, yeah, that's right. I wonder if he'd let you fix that. And approached him and said, hey, you got a great chorus there. Would you be open to me stepping into it and fixing that? And it turned out to be a title cut of a Phillips, Craig and Dean record called Top of My Lungs. So I'm always, open if it's the right thing.
So what if it's a writer that is not wanting to put the song out themselves, mm-hmm. right? It's like, I'm the artist and the writer and want to write with you. And that's one thing. That's kind of this conversation that we're having there, I think. But if it's a writer that is like you, wanting to write for other people, mm-hmm. right? And they're still trying to get opportunities, knowing that you don't, together by yourselves, there's not the opportunity necessarily for it to go somewhere other than your publisher pitching it to an artist. But together, you want to write, the other person wants to write with you, with the hopes that it would bring in an artist to write.
Right.
Almost
given that there aren't that's not going to happen that much in CCM these days.
Yeah.
That's just what makes that tougher.
Yeah. Just part of it.
It's just not that much to shoot for.
It's a different world we live in.
It is. It's funny. All the songs that you mentioned that are the ones that are coming out, all of those were written in the room with the artist.
Yeah.
Sitting there.
So that's pretty much the takeaway mm-hmm. of the conversation is you got to build a connection and a relationship with artists mm-hmm. and write with them to really have any success.
I think that's a pendulum right now. everything is a pendulum. It moves in different directions. That may move. I think it's a really slow moving pendulum, but there could be another season years from now where it's different. But it's the moment for sure.
That's cool. Well, Tony, thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
I appreciate your time and your wisdom and expertise and sharing all this with us. And hope people will take it and run with it and apply all this to their careers, and so they can look back on this someday and be like, you know what, I listened and Tony Wood gave me this advice on this podcast, and I put it into practice, and that was it. Well, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right, guys, thank you for listening to my conversation with Tony Wood today. Thank you. I'm so grateful once again. Thank you for coming back and continuing this conversation and this journey with me. The beginning of season 3. I thought this was an amazing first episode to start off the season with. So thank you guys for joining me. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to this on, and be sure to let other people know about it. This is how we get the word out, is by you guys spreading the word and letting people know to listen to this podcast on the different platforms that you guys are a part of. So thank you again, and look forward to our conversation next week. Remember, Edenbrook Productions is here to help if you need consulting services via phone call, Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime. Be sure to let us know how we can help you begin to make a living in the music industry.